Hello, I've got Grimmy here with me today. This is Dearest by Jacquie Walters. I don't know, can you hear him purring? I don't know if the microphone will pick it up. He's determined to join us today, so you off, Jilly? Little Jelly Bean? Good boy. So Dearest is the story of Flora. She gives birth to baby Iris a few weeks prematurely. Her husband is still deployed overseas, and she finds herself struggling to cope alone. She starts to see strange beetle infestations, she has night terrors, and her childhood imaginary friend reemerges. In a moment of desperation, she emails her estranged mother, who responds by turning up unexpectedly on her doorstep to help. When she opens her door to her mother, is she letting in a chance to reconnect, or has she invited something evil into her home? So, as someone who does not have children, I am a proud cat owner, but that doesn't really count. um, I'm honestly, I'm not sure how parents do it. It looks like really difficult to me. So I'm always kind of impressed by parents, and perhaps especially mothers, because, your body goes through so much and all that kind of thing. So, adjusting or readjusting to life after giving birth and having a baby has always kind of impressed me as a really difficult thing to do. And because there's so much change, both inwardly and outwardly, in this time in the life of a family, and also, I guess, since in the past, this was sort of a dangerous, sometimes deadly time in the life of mother and baby, I think it's kind of an arena or a zone that's always been ripe for horror stories. I also find that sort of dark fairy tale trope of the mother as a source of evil or bad intentions rather than as a nurturer or a sort of loving force is also very fascinating. There's so much horror in the idea. It's such a dark subversion, basically, and one that feels so dangerous. The fragile child at the mercy of someone who is sort of feigning innocence, but is actually cruel. So I think, that's sort of like a wicked stepmother kind of trope, or in real life, abusive or a narcissistic parent. I think that's just something that works so well in a novel, or in a horror novel specifically. The sort of monstrous, the woman is like a monstrous force. So Dearest is kind of tapping into some of those things. It plays on these ideas. It takes some of the body horror of birth and motherhood as well, of the changing body or the body out of control, even the aging female body. And it also takes the idea of hormones and the horror of not knowing if your own sort of emotions and feelings are real or can be trusted, sort of as in those postpartum type feelings. Even that idea of woman as sort of hysterical, that old notion that women's bodies make us crazy. So the book does this in a way that feels very empathetic and feminine. It's not just kind of drawing on that stuff and being like, oh, isn't this gross or whatever, and trying to tap into that overly sanitized sort of Christmas card version of these things. It's more about the horror of secrets and the half known, of our primal need to protect our children, and also our primal need for our own mothers, even as adults. So it's not about vilifying or blaming women, or in any way sort of making women seem fragile or gross. It's about the things and people that haunt us at times of transition in our lives, and about how women are shamed for not being perfect mothers or naturally knowing all about how to mother, how to be a mother. So I liked this book. It's quite dark. I'm not sure how someone who has had children might feel about it. I wonder if they'd have a different perspective on it than I would. There's, as I mentioned, some body horror. There's a little bit of gore in this book sometimes. It has a really wonderful atmosphere with a witchy, claustrophobic sort of feeling. It made me think of that old story, The Yellow Wallpaper, if you know that one a little bit. It takes place mostly around the one location or around the home, and has motifs like imaginary friends. I mentioned the bug infestations before, and that kind of dirt, like mess and dirt, that kind of thing. night terrors, sleep paralysis, nightmares, and then not trusting those close to you. And there's also a spooky bathroom mirror. I think there's something kind of wonderful. I'm thinking more of horror movies about the way the bathroom, I guess because it's a space where we're quite vulnerable. So it's something that works really well in horror stories or, horror movies, that kind of using the bathroom as a location. There's also the fear that comes from loving another person wholeheartedly, most especially as a parent or mother, where you're helpless to completely keep your child safe at all times. And yet you're also sort of omnipresent in that child's, children totally rely on and trust the parent. So that's sort of like a huge, dichotomy and a huge responsibility of parenthood that I think is kind of used really well in this book to create a sense of sort of creeping dread and things like that. So I mentioned above the kind of dark fairy tale aspect of this book. In the characters' names, Flora, the Greek goddess of spring, and the name of our heroine, Flora is associated with Zephyrus, who was her lover in Greek mythology, and Zephy is her imaginary friend's name. So there's kind of that kind of thing there. Then there's Iris, which is the name of the baby. And Iris was a messenger of the gods and could move between worlds. So that's kind of, an interesting thing to play with here, that kind of idea. Iris also went to Demeter when her daughter Persephone was taken to Hades. So Persephone, of course, like Flora, is associated with the spring and new life. And there's a dark mother figure in this book too. So that kind of links back to Demeter again. So, without making sort of too much of it, I think those names are really well used to sort of give us some themes and thoughts as we're reading. Without giving too much away. I mean, those kinds of older stories that I mentioned there, they have, mother's loss, death, grief, rites of passage, sort of renewed life, things like that, things from, moving between different worlds. So I thought those are all really good little sort of tidbits that were in there. I really like this choice. And I think it just kind of adds a layer without being overly obvious or sort of archetypal in a way. Archetypes are great in stories, but I think with some things it can mean that you can kind of, it's a bit of a giveaway, you can guess the ending or whatever. But I don't know, this book does some interesting things. I liked this book. It's not a long read, but it feels quite rich, and it's definitely the right length for the story. I think any longer might have slowed down a little bit. So it's like the length means it's got a really good pace to it. It shows a great deal about what it's like being a new mother, the huge pressure, changes, and strong emotions that come up, as well as just being an interesting and fresh horror story with a nice amount of twists and turns and scary things. I think this could easily have been another sort of woman is unreliable narrator type story, which I guess I wouldn't have actually minded, but it really feels like its own thing to me. It doesn't kind of go into any sort of tropes with that or that kind of thing. I think, obviously, I'm talking about sort of motherhood and female lead character here. I don't think that if you were not a mother, or if you are not a woman or not experiencing those things or whatever, I think this book really is for any gender or anything like that. So don't be put off. I was just kind of exploring some of that here. But yeah, I did note in the author bio that the author is an Emmy-winning screenwriter. And I think there's something a little bit cinematic about this book in a way. And I think this book would make an excellent horror movie. So if you do like horror movies, this might be a really good book for you to check out. And this one is solidly in horror territory. So this one, if you kind of love female main character horror kind of stories, that you're going to like this one. So check it out. It might not be for the faint of heart around pregnancy and motherhood. If that stuff kind of, maybe isn't for you, then maybe this book isn't for you. I don't know. But I really enjoyed it, and I will be looking out for more from this author. And I wanted to thank Hachette Book Group Canada for the copy of this book for review.